At the family dinner, my daughter-in-law leaned in close, her perfume cloying and sharp, and whispered into my ear with a smug little smile, "I'm pregnant with your husband's baby, you tacky old woman." I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I laughed. Right there at the table. "Don't worry, dear," I said, my voice as light and sweet as the apple glaze on the roast pork. "Everything will work out just fine." She pulled away, confusion flickering across her face like a passing storm. She was expecting devastation. She was expecting drama. But I had already begun something she hadn't planned for. A quiet, deliberate unraveling. My name is Marlene Avery, and I'm 65 years old. I'd been married to Leonard for 43 years. 43 years of shared breakfasts, gardening in silence, and knowing exactly when to pass the salt without a word. Our life in the big white house on Sycamore Hill was the kind of life people envy for its peace. I thought I knew the man I'd built all this with. I thought I knew our son, Gavin. I thought I knew the woman he had married, Sienna. But it turns out I didn't know anything at all. That dinner was supposed to be just a family evening. The chandelier Leonard had surprised me with on our 20th anniversary glowed above the polished oak table. I used the good china, the ones passed down from my grandmother, and the crystal glasses that caught the light like diamonds. I made Gavin's favorite, roast pork with maple carrots, and set everything just right. Sienna sat across from me in a form-fitting ivory blouse and expensive jewelry that she wore like armor. She was 29, a decade younger than Gavin, and had always struck me as someone too hungry for comfort, too strategic in her charm. Leonard sat at the head of the table, his silver hair neatly brushed back, his expression unreadable. He hadn't looked me in the eye for weeks, and tonight was no exception. Gavin was oblivious as always, smiling wide as he complimented the food. "Mom, you've really outdone yourself," he said, cutting into his pork with boyish enthusiasm. "This is amazing." I smiled back, but it felt like my face was wearing a mask. Something was wrong. Something had been wrong for a long time. I could feel it, like a hairline crack forming beneath a coat of fresh paint. Sienna raised her glass and said, "Marlene is such a devoted wife and mother. Really, it's inspiring." The way she said devoted made my skin crawl. I sipped my wine and said nothing. She dabbed at her mouth with a cloth napkin, then said, almost casually, "I've been thinking a lot about devotion lately. How it endures, even through sickness, betrayal, deception." The words hung in the air like fog. Leonard shifted in his chair, the sound of his fork tapping his plate louder than it should have been. "That's beautiful, honey," Gavin said, beaming at her. "Marriage is about loyalty." Sienna's eyes flicked to me, glittering. "Or sometimes sharing what someone else already built." I felt something shift in my gut. I couldn't say why, not yet, but it was like her words had punctured something sacred. Then she stood, one hand gently cradling her still flat stomach. "I have news," she said with theatrical softness. "We're expecting." Gavin jumped up with a delighted gasp and wrapped his arms around her. That's incredible. We're going to be parents." My son looked like a child himself in that moment, wide-eyed and full of joy. "Mom, Dad, you're going to be grandparents." I clapped softly and offered a smile, but my heart had already dropped to the floor. Not because of the pregnancy, but because of the way Sienna's gaze landed on Leonard when Gavin wasn't looking. A sharp glance, loaded with something smug, something final. After the toast, after the congratulations, Sienna made her move. She walked around the table and bent down as if to hug me. Her lips brushed my ear and she whispered those awful words. "I'm pregnant with your husband's baby, you tacky old woman." My fingers gripped the edge of the table until my knuckles turned white, but I smiled. I laughed. Not from amusement, but from the strange, surreal absurdity of it all. Everything will work out just fine, I replied. She pulled away, startled by my composure. She was expecting me to crumble. Instead, I was already thinking, already planning. Across the table, Leonard still wouldn't meet me in the eye. And in that moment, I knew. I knew something had broken between us. The rest of the dinner was a blur of autopilot gestures and forced small talk. When they finally left, Gavin bubbling with excitement, and Sienna offering a sly little wave, I stood in the kitchen washing dishes with trembling hands. Leonard came in behind me, his footsteps slow, like a man preparing for a sentencing. "Marlene," he said, "not tonight. I can't do this tonight." He paused, then turned and walked away, up the stairs, to the room we had shared for more than 42 years. But I didn't follow. I stood alone, the sponge limp in my hand, staring at the sink like it could give me answers. That night, sleep didn't come. I lay in our bed beside Leonard, listening to his slow breathing and wondering how many lies had passed through that same mouth. At sunrise, I made his breakfast. Toast cut diagonally, eggs soft the way he liked them, coffee black. We sat at the breakfast table, like we always had, two ghosts pretending to be people. "Sleep well?" he asked without looking up. "Fine," I lied. He folded his paper and announced he'd be in the garden all day. The roses needed attention. I watched him walk away through the kitchen window. His back stooped slightly, his gait slower than it once had been. He still wore the same flannel work shirt he'd had for years. The same man, but no longer familiar. The rest of the morning, I moved through the house on autopilot, polishing already clean counters and folding laundry that didn't need it. My mind kept circling the same question. How long had I been living with strangers? When the phone rang, it was Gavin. "Mom," he said brightly, "did you sleep at all last night?" I couldn't stop smiling. "It's wonderful news," I said. "Sienna is already planning baby names. She's over the moon. And she said Dad was so sweet when she told him, got a little emotional." "When did she tell him?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Oh, about a week ago. She was nervous about how you'd take it. She wanted him to know first." A week. She had told Leonard before she told Gavin. My stomach turned. Why? That wasn't just being considerate. That was strategy. That was leverage. After I hung up, I stood by the kitchen window and stared into the garden where Leonard was trimming the rose bushes. Then I saw him pause because Sienna's silver car had just pulled into the driveway. She stepped out in a soft pink blouse, holding a takeaway coffee. Her expression was calm, confident, like she owned this place. I stood behind the curtain and watched her. She walked up to Leonard. They spoke closely, too closely. She touched his arm and he smiled, really smiled, a smile I hadn't seen from him in months. My chest felt tight, as though someone had wound a wire around my ribs. They spoke for several minutes, then Sienna glanced up toward the house. I stepped back from the window instinctively, heart pounding. When I looked again, she was gone. Leonard remained in the garden, humming softly as he watered the rose beds. That evening, I said nothing. He was cheerful, more cheerful than I had seen him in weeks. "The garden's doing well," he said. "We'll have full bloom before the frost." "Sienna stopped by." "Yes," he replied, not missing a beat. "She's nervous about the pregnancy." "What kind of reassurance did she need?" Pause. "Just first-time mother stuff. She's worried about the future." But I wasn't worried about the baby anymore. I was worried about the future of my family. That night, as he fell asleep beside me, I stared at the ceiling, wide awake. I had let too much pass by without question. I was done pretending. Tomorrow, I would begin finding out exactly what my husband and daughter-in-law were hiding. I didn't know where it would lead, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to be the fool in this story anymore. The next morning, Leonard left the house for his weekly doctor's appointment, a routine I'd never questioned until now. As soon as I heard the front door click shut and the engine of his sedan fade down the hill, I climbed the stairs to his study. That room had always been his domain. I'd respected it, left it untouched, and only entered when he called me in to show me a gardening article or a new book he thought I'd enjoy. But today, I stepped in like a stranger, closing the door behind me and letting the soft click of the latch settle around me like thunder. The room smelled of old paper, cedar polish, and Leonard's aftershave. Dust motes floated in the beams of light coming through the plantation shutters. Everything was orderly. Of course it was. Leonard was a man of rituals. Books alphabetized, pens in a carved wooden holder, a magnifying glass beside the gardening catalogs. The surface of his desk was deceptively clean, but I knew him well enough to start with the drawers. The top one held nothing unusual. Stationery, paper clips, a pack of chewing gum he thought I didn't know about. The second held bills, doctor notes, and copies of repair estimates for the back deck. Innocent. Boring. But in the bottom drawer, beneath a neatly stacked set of rose pruning guides and irrigation system blueprints, I found something that didn't belong. A manila folder filled with bank statements from an account I had never seen before. The name on them was Leonard's, not our joint account, a private one. Each page had neat printed columns, deposits, withdrawals, balances. I turned the first few pages with shaking hands. Deposits of $5,000, $8,000, sometimes even $12,000 at a time, all labeled as cash deposits. And then, always within a day or two, withdrawals in the same rounded figures, $3,000, $4,500, $7,000 in cash. The account had been active for at least 6 months. I sat back in his leather chair, my mind racing. This wasn't just a side project or retirement fund. This was something else, something secret. I pulled out my phone and photographed each statement page by page. Even as my fingers trembled so badly, I had to retake a few. I put everything back in place just as I'd found it. But I no longer saw Leonard's study as just a quiet corner of his life. It was now a place of questions I needed answers to. I was still deep in thought when I heard the sound of tires on gravel. I crept to the window in the upstairs hallway, careful to stay hidden behind the curtain. Sienna's silver Audi was in the driveway again. My pulse kicked. I moved quickly and quietly down the hall to the guest bedroom, Gavin's old room, which Sienna had more or less claimed as her own during visits. I stood just outside the cracked door and listened. Silence. She wasn't inside, which meant she was outside. I headed to the kitchen window, standing behind the curtain just like I had the day before. Sure enough, she was in the garden again. But this time, she wasn't talking to Leonard. She was standing with Marcus, the gardener, a quiet, gentle man in his 30s who lived 2 streets down and took care of several homes in the neighborhood. Their conversation looked heated. Sienna was gesturing with her hands. Marcus's head was down and he kept shaking it. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could see that Sienna pulled something out of her purse. An envelope. Thick. Sealed. She shoved it toward Marcus. He hesitated, looked around, then quickly took it and stuffed it into his coat pocket like he didn't want anyone to see. My heart began to hammer. Was she paying him? For what? What did Marcus know? Cedric handled all the yard business, contracts, payments, everything. There was no reason Sienna should be handing him anything. Just then, Gavin's blue SUV turned into the driveway. I ducked low, peeking from the side of the curtain. He got out with a smile on his face and called out to his wife, who immediately turned from Marcus and walked toward him, her voice light, flirty, easy. "Surprise! Thought I'd meet you for lunch." Gavin laughed, hugging her tight. "You're the best. What are you doing here?" "Just chatting with Marcus. You know how I've been obsessed with starting a flower bed for the baby's room." She said it so smoothly, I almost believed her. But I had seen the envelope. I had seen Marcus's unease. And I knew there was more going on than a flower consultation. They came into the house together, chatting and laughing, their joy so sincere it made my stomach twist. I was sitting in the living room pretending to read a magazine when Gavin called out, "Hey, Mom! Look who I caught loitering in your garden!" "Sienna," I said, putting down a magazine with a smile that felt stretched thin. "You're becoming quite the horticulturist." She laughed, a sound too bright, too perfect. "Just getting ideas. Thought it'd be sweet to plant something special for the baby. Maybe bluebells or lavender." I said, "Marcus says bluebells are finicky. Not easy to keep healthy." "Oh, he's very helpful," she said, eyes locking on mine for just a second too long. "He's been understanding." Understanding. The way she said it made my stomachs flip again. I said, "That's nice," forcing my voice to stay even. We had lunch, something light and quick, and Gavin did most of the talking. He was still thrilled, still planning baby names, still dreaming about cribs and playpens and weekend hikes with a baby carrier. Sienna smiled and nodded and held his hand. But I watched her eyes. They kept drifting to the garden, to Marcus, who was now trimming the hedges with a speed that looked like anxiety. When they left, I watched from the window as Sienna looked back over her shoulder one last time. Her face was different now. Tight. Tense. Calculating. That evening, Leonard barely touched his dinner. He moved the peas around his plate, then pushed back his chair with a sigh. "I'm going to bed early. Didn't sleep well last night." I didn't stop him. I didn't ask what was on his mind. I knew. He was unraveling, just like I was. Just like Sienna would be soon. Later, while I was washing the dishes, the phone rang. Leonard answered it in the hallway, his voice low. I dried my hands and stepped closer, listening without making a sound. "Yes, I'll be there. Tomorrow. Same time." Pause. "I understand." He hung up slowly. I stepped around the corner. "Who was that?" "No one. Just an errand I need to run tomorrow." "An errand at night?" He hesitated. "Just something I need to take care of." Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into a study. I stood there in the hallway with a dish towel in my hand and felt my skin go cold. This wasn't just an affair. This was deeper, dirtier, more dangerous. And I was done being polite. Tomorrow, I would follow him, and if Sienna was involved in the secret, if she thought she could destroy my family from the inside, I was going to take that smug little smile off her face. Not with screaming or accusations, but with truth. Cold, sharp, and undeniable. The following evening, I stood in our bedroom window with the curtain drawn slightly to the side, watching Leonard's car pull out of the driveway at exactly 7:30 p.m. The sky was a muted blue, the last light of day giving way to shadows. He hadn't kissed me goodbye. He hadn't said where he was going, just mumbled something about needing to pick up supplies for the roses. But there wasn't a single garden center within 50 miles still open at this hour. I waited until his taillights disappeared down the street, then grabbed my cardigan and stepped quietly out of the bedroom. I was almost to the stairs when I heard voices. Outside. Not from the front, from the backyard. My heart jumped. I crept down the hallway and slipped into the guest room, peering through the window that overlooked the garden. I wasn't prepared for what I saw. Sienna was standing near the garden shed in the fading light, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, speaking with Marcus. Her tone was sharp, her expression hard. Marcus looked distraught. He kept running his hand through his hair, shaking his head, backing away slightly, only for her to close the distance again. I couldn't hear a word, but their body language screamed tension. At one point, Marcus gestured toward the house, and Sienna's head whipped around so fast I flinched. I ducked instinctively, my heart thudding in my ears. When I looked again, she had turned back to him, talking rapidly. Then Marcus said something, firm, final, and he started to walk away. She reached for his arm. He stopped, face contorted with something like guilt or pain, then yanked free and kept walking. He disappeared behind the garage where his truck was parked. Sienna stood alone under the glow of the backyard motion light, her expression unreadable, her hands pressed against her stomach. For a moment, I just watched her, this woman my son had married, this woman who had wormed her way into our lives, our home, our family. I wasn't sure what chilled me more, her cruelty or how brilliantly she hid it. When Leonard returned an hour later, he barely looked at me. He went straight into his study and closed the door. I heard him making calls, his voice low and tight. I didn't ask questions. I was too busy going over what I'd seen, playing the scene in the garden over and over in my head. There was something bigger at play, and Sienna was in the middle of it. The next morning was gray and drizzling. Perfect cover for what I needed to do. After Leonard left the house again, I made my way to the guest room, the same room Sienna used during her day visits. It still smelled faintly of her perfume. Sweet, cloying, artificial. Her silk scarf was draped across the back of the chair. A bottle of expensive lotion sat on the nightstand. I opened the drawers one by one. Nothing but folded clothes and a few makeup cases. But in the bottom drawer, beneath a neatly stacked pile of sweaters, I found it. A manila folder buried deep. I pulled it out with trembling fingers. Inside were financial documents that turned my stomach. Bank statements in Gavin's name, but I knew he didn't have these accounts. These weren't his doing. Huge withdrawals, all in cash, going back nearly 8 months. Credit card applications with his signature, but it wasn't his handwriting. Loan approvals, emergency fund account statements. And then, at the very bottom, a handwritten ledger in Sienna's flowing script. Northwestern Mutual, $45,000. Chase Credit Line, $30,000. Personal Loan, M. Santos, $18,000. Emergency Fund, $12,000. I didn't even know my son had access to some of these lenders. And why would Marcus's name be listed? She was pulling money from everywhere, using Gavin's name to open accounts, take loans, bury him in debt, and he didn't know. Or he had been coerced into it. My mind whirled. This wasn't just deception, this was something else, something calculated and cruel. Before I could fully process it, I heard the front door open downstairs. I jumped, shoved the folder back into place and closed the drawer. I stepped into the hallway just in time to hear Sienna's voice float up the stairs. "Marlene, I hope you don't mind. I let myself in." I forced my face into a smile as I descended the stairs, every step echoing in my ears like a warning drumbeat. "Of course not. Would you like some coffee?" "That would be lovely," she replied, taking a seat at the kitchen table like it was her throne. I poured the coffee with a steady hand, even though I could barely feel my fingers. She watched me with her bright green eyes, always too aware, always calculating. "You seem tense," she said after a sip. "Is everything all right?" "Just tired," I lied. "Didn't sleep well." "I can imagine," she said smoothly. "New babies are exciting but overwhelming, especially when they weren't exactly planned." I turned slowly, meeting her gaze. "Lulia, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you tell Leonard about the pregnancy before you told Gavin?" Her lips parted just slightly. That flicker of surprise was so quick, most people would have missed it, but I caught it. "I was nervous," she said, recovering quickly. "I thought your husband might ease the conversation. He's always been so supportive." "Supportive," I repeated. "Yes, he's been very protective lately. Worried about me, about stress, finances, that sort of thing." "Finances?" "Oh, just normal things." She leaned forward, lowering her voice like we were co-conspirators. "You know how hard it is for young couples these days. Loans, expectations, mistakes." "What kind of mistakes?" She laughed softly. "The kind that take understanding family to forgive. The kind Leonard understands." "You mean the kind he helps pay for?" Her eyes narrowed slightly, but her smile didn't fade. "You're a smart woman, Marlene." She stood and walked to the window, glancing outside. Leonard and Marcus were in the yard again, near the tool shed. They were speaking closely, Marcus shaking his head. Sienna's posture stiffened. "Excuse me," she said suddenly. "I need to speak with them." "Of course." But I followed her outside, trailing behind silently, not even pretending. When I reached the edge of the garden, the conversation came to an abrupt halt. Marcus looked up first. His face was pale, lips slightly parted like he'd just swallowed something bitter. Leonard was pale too, and visibly anxious. Sienna turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Everything all right, Marlene?" You all looked deep in conversation. "I was just telling Marcus we appreciate his hard work," Leonard said quickly. Marcus stepped back. "I can't keep doing this. Gavin's a good man. He doesn't deserve this." "Marcus," Sienna hissed, her voice sharp, "we had an agreement." I stepped forward. "What agreement?" Leonard's shoulders sagged. "Babe." "Tell her," Marcus said, voice thick. "She deserves to know." "Marlene, I'm not having an affair. I never touched Sienna, I swear to you." Sienna laughed, a brittle, glass-shattering sound. "Isn't that exactly what a guilty man would say?" "Stop," I said. "Just stop." I looked at Leonard. "Then why did you let me believe it?" "Because I had to," he whispered. "She's been threatening to destroy Gavin if I didn't play along." "Destroy him how?" Marcus answered, the truth finally spilling out. "She's been blackmailing Leonard, using Gavin's gambling addiction as leverage. She got him into online betting, sports, poker. She encouraged it, and when he racked up over $100,000 in debt, she told Leonard the only way she'd help pay it off if he played the villain." I felt my knees go weak. "She was never pregnant with Leonard's child, was she?" "No," Marcus said. "It happened once, a mistake. I didn't even know she was pregnant until she used it against Leonard." Sienna folded her arms. "What now, Marlene? You've heard the truth. Are you going to tell Gavin everything, break your son's heart and watch your family burn? Or are you going to play nice and pretend none of this ever happened?" I didn't answer. Not yet. But I knew one thing for certain. She had just made the biggest mistake of her life, thinking I was too old, too weak, too polite to fight back. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I couldn't, but because I wouldn't. I sat in the armchair near our bedroom window, wrapped in a blanket, staring out at the moonlit garden where the worst of the evening's truths had unfolded. Leonard was asleep in bed behind me, or at least pretending to be. He hadn't said much after Sienna left in a storm of tight-lipped silence. He'd simply lowered himself into bed and turned to face the wall, as though curling away from the shame. I didn't blame him. I didn't even hate him. I just didn't know who he was anymore. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let this family unravel. Not on my watch. I kept thinking about Marcus, the shame on his face, the way he'd stood in the garden, torn between confession and fear. He'd left without another word, and I hadn't seen him since. I wasn't even sure if he'd come back to finish the week's work or if he'd just disappear. And Gavin, my sweet, blind, trusting son, I thought of how excited he had been at the dinner table, already dreaming of nursery colors, of baby giggles and bedtime stories, and all of it had been a lie. Sienna had spun a fantasy from his deepest fears and weaknesses and tied it together with pregnancy and debt, wrapping it around his neck like a noose. She had made pawns out of everyone, Leonard, Marcus, even me. And worst of all, she'd done it so quietly, so efficiently, we hadn't realized the trap until it had already closed. At sunrise, I made my decision. I wouldn't destroy my son with all this at once, not yet. But I had to have something more than confessions and hearsay. I needed proof, something even Sienna couldn't spin her way out of. I waited until Leonard left for his morning walk before I went upstairs again, back to the guest bathroom. Sienna had used it the day before during her visit, and I remember hearing the water running. just a gut feeling, but something told me she'd been in there longer than necessary. I checked the sink. Everything looked clean, as always. Then I noticed something near the base of the toilet. A slip of white, half tucked against the wall. I bent down and picked it up. A crumpled envelope. My hands went cold. It was unmarked, but sealed. I slipped it open carefully, heart thudding, and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Gene Tech Laboratories. DNA results. Dated 3 days ago. The language was sterile, clinical, but the message screamed through the page. Mother, Sienna Camille Hayden. Child, unborn, via amniocentesis. Alleged father 1, Gavin Ellis Hayden. Excluded. 0% probability of paternity. Alleged father 2, Marcus Dean Keller. Not excluded. 99.7% probability of paternity. I sank onto the closed toilet seat, holding the paper in trembling hands. It was worse than I thought. Sienna had gone out of her way to confirm the truth, not hide it, document it. Why? Why would she test the paternity and keep the results if she intended to pass off the baby as Gavin's? And then it hit me. Insurance. She was building a trap from every direction. If things ever went south, she could pull out this document and burn us all to the ground. Claim Leonard forced her into silence. Claim Marcus took advantage of her. She could reinvent herself as the tragic victim at a moment's notice. She had created her own alibi ahead of time. I folded the paper neatly and tucked it into my cardigan pocket. When I heard her heels on the stairs minutes later, I was already standing at the sink, running the faucet. "Marlene," she called out brightly from the hall. "I didn't realize you were home." "Just checking the faucet," I said, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "These pipes can be temperamental." She smiled, but there was something taut in the corners of her mouth. "She was?" "I hoping we could talk," she said, stepping into the room. "Of course. Coffee." "Please." I moved past her, heart hammering, but kept my face calm. In the kitchen, we sat like we had so many mornings before, 2 women in the same house, but never really sharing it. She took her coffee with cream and 1 sugar, stirring it thoughtfully as she watched me. "You know, I really admire you," she said slowly. "You've lived a full life, a long marriage, raised a kind son, a beautiful home. So much to be proud of." "Is that why you're trying to take it from me?" I asked, too calmly. She blinked. "Excuse me? My husband, my son, my peace?" She smiled again, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I haven't taken anything, Marlene. Things change. People change. Sometimes we adapt. Sometimes we get left behind." "Or pushed out," I replied. "I never wanted that." "No?" I tilted my head. "Then what was the plan? Raise the child that doesn't belong to Gavin and pretend forever? Or throw Leonard under the bus and watch the whole house collapse?" Her mask slipped just slightly. "You don't understand." "Try me." She looked at me across the rim of her mug, eyes gleaming. "Leonard made a choice. He chose to protect Gavin. He chose to cooperate with me. We both know what would happen if your son's gambling problem came to light. The shame, the judgment, his career, his entire future, gone. And you," I said, "what did you get out of it?" "Stability, safety. A child needs those things." She placed a hand on her belly, and for a moment something like real emotion flickered in her eyes. "You think I'm a monster, but I'm protecting my child, and that's more than you ever did for yours." That struck me like a slap. She knew. She had gone deep. She had dug through my past like a thief. She had found the truth about my father, about the way his gambling had destroyed our home when I was a girl. "That's low," I said. "That's survival," she snapped. "I did what I had to do, and if you want to protect Gavin the way Leonard did, you'll do the same." "I have something you dropped," I said. Her eyes flickered. "Dropped?" "An envelope." I pulled it halfway out of my pocket but didn't place it on the table. Her breathing quickened. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? I held her gaze. You're very careful, Sienna, but you made a mistake. And I'm going to make sure that mistake saves my family. She stood up quickly, knocking her chair back. You wouldn't dare. Try me? And in that moment, as we stood on opposite sides of the kitchen table, I knew that she had finally realized who she was really dealing with. Not a broken old woman, but a mother, a wife, a fighter. The next move was mine, and I wasn't going to waste it. The morning after that final conversation with Sienna, I sat alone at the breakfast table, Leonard's untouched toast growing cold across from mine. The folded DNA test lay between us like a grenade. He came downstairs in his usual blue flannel, but his eyes were wary. He knew something had changed. We need to talk, I said, before he even reached for his coffee. He nodded silently and sat. I pushed the envelope toward him. She dropped this in the upstairs bathroom. I found it yesterday. Leonard unfolded the document slowly, his eyes scanning the clinical black and white lines, his face draining of color. So, Gavin's not the father, he whispered, though it wasn't a question. No, I said. And it's not you either, Leonard. It's Marcus. He nodded once, like he'd already guessed. She told me it was mine. Said if I didn't play along, if I didn't let you think we were having an affair, she'd go public with Gavin's gambling, ruin him. And you believed you had no other choice, I said, my voice quiet. I was ashamed. I didn't know how to fix it. I thought I could protect him, buy her silence, make it all go away. By letting me believe you were sleeping with her? Better that you hate me, he said, looking straight at me for the first time in days, than our son get destroyed. The sincerity in his voice broke something inside me. I reached for his hand. We can't protect him with lies anymore. He deserves to know. All of it. Not just about her, about the gambling too, about how deep it went. Leonard nodded. Then let's do it together. And so we began planning a dinner Gavin would never forget. I cooked all his childhood favorites. Pot roast, buttered corn, that lemon meringue pie he used to request every birthday until he turned 20. Leonard set the table with our wedding china, because this time it wasn't just a meal, it was a reckoning. When Gavin and Sienna arrived, she was glowing again. Perfect makeup, hand resting over her belly, her smile rehearsed. Gavin walked in holding flowers for me. Mom, this is amazing, he said, kissing my cheek. You didn't have to go all out. Family is always worth the effort, I said, smiling back. Sienna sat quietly at first, watching me, studying me, unsure what I would do. I could see her calculating behind that pleasant mask. We made it through most of dinner with small talk and safe topics. Gavin talked about his latest client project. Sienna chimed in about nursery themes. Then I cleared the plates and came back with the envelope. I placed it on the table in front of her. Sienna, I said, gently, you left something behind during your last visit. Her face froze. Gavin looked confused. What's this? He asked. Open it, I said. He did, and I watched the color drain from my son's face. First confusion, then disbelief, and finally heartbreak. DNA results? He whispered. What is this? It's a paternity test, I said, quietly. Sienna had it done earlier this week. You're not the father. What? He looked at her eyes wide. Tell me this is some kind of mistake. Sienna didn't answer. She just stared at the paper. Sienna, he said louder, voice shaking. Say something. She exhaled, long and slow, and said, It's not what it looks like. Then what is it? Gavin cried, his voice cracking. You told me we were starting a family. You said this baby was mine. I was protecting you, she said weakly. From what? From yourself, she snapped, and the mask began to crumble. From your gambling, from your recklessness. You couldn't even keep a savings account without blowing it on bets. I did what I had to do to keep this family afloat. By lying? By sleeping with Marcus? It wasn't supposed to happen, she said low. It was one time. And blackmailing my father? That was one time too?
She stood up abruptly. I did what I had to do. I didn't have a choice. You had every choice, Leonard said, rising beside me, and you made all the wrong ones. Sienna stared at him, then at me. So what now? You're going to throw me out? Make me raise this baby alone? No, I said. I already called Marcus's sister. She's agreed to take you in, help you raise the child with honesty. No more lies. No more leverage. Sienna's lips parted in shock. You did that for me? I did that for the baby. He didn't ask for any of this, and he deserves better than a life built on manipulation. Gavin was still in shock, frozen at the table. He looked at Sienna like he didn't recognize her. Get out, he said. Sienna? Get out, Sienna. She stood there for a moment longer, then turned, shoulders rigid, and walked out without another word. I followed her only far enough to hand her the small bag I'd packed. There's a plane ticket in there, Phoenix, tomorrow morning. She didn't thank me, just nodded and walked to her car. When she was gone, I returned to find Gavin sitting at the dining table, the test results still in his hands. I didn't know. I didn't see any of it. I thought I was building something real. I sat beside him. You still can, but you'll need to start with yourself. The gambling. I know. I'll get help. I swear it. His voice broke. I wanted to be a good husband, a good father. You will be, Leonard said, joining us. But it starts with honesty, with facing your mistakes, not hiding from them. Gavin looked between us and nodded. Then let's do it together. I reached across the table and took both their hands. For the first time in months, I felt something like peace. But I also knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Rebuilding never is. And that's why I made one last decision that night. One more quiet step to protect what mattered. Because Sienna had underestimated me, and she still didn't know what I had in store for her next. The next morning, the house felt quieter than it had in weeks. There was no tension trailing through the halls, no footsteps creeping like secrets, no fake laughter echoing from the living room. It was as if the house itself had exhaled. Leonard had already gone out to his workshop behind the garage, the place he always retreated to when his mind was too heavy to carry indoors. Gavin was still asleep upstairs, exhausted after the emotional bomb that had gone off at dinner. And I was at the kitchen table with a cup of strong black coffee, watching the sun slice through the blinds, warming the wood grain as if to say, "You did it." But I didn't feel finished. Not yet. Because the truth was, Sienna had left, but she hadn't really disappeared. I knew women like her. She would find a way back. Maybe through the courts, maybe through the media, maybe through Marcus. And while I had arranged a safe place for her to go, with Marcus's sister in Arizona, I had no way of knowing if she'd stay, or if she'd bring more fire when she returned. I needed insurance. So I drove out to the town library, not because I needed books, but because it was quiet and neutral, and because I had asked Marcus to meet me there. He arrived looking like a man who hadn't slept in days. His hair was disheveled, eyes puffy with guilt, shirt wrinkled. When he saw me, he started to speak, but I held up a hand. "Sit," I said gently. He obeyed without a word. We were in a back corner room tucked behind a wall of genealogy files and microfilm machines no one used anymore. I passed him a copy of the DNA results. He didn't flinch when he read it. "I already knew," he said, "but seeing it in print makes it worse somehow." "You may have made a mistake," I said, "but you're not a monster. Not like her." He swallowed. "I didn't know how deep she'd gotten her claws into Gavin. I didn't know she was blackmailing Leonard. I thought it was just an affair, a mistake that would stay between us." "Nothing stays between anyone for long when shame is involved," I said. "That's what she counts on. That people will stay quiet to protect their own reputations." He nodded slowly. "So why am I here?" "Because I need your help," I said. "And because you owe it to my son." He looked up at me, eyes red. "I'll do anything." "Good. because you're going to help us file a legal statement confirming everything. The affair, the manipulation, the threats. I already called my lawyer. He's drawing up a document that protects Gavin from any future claims she might make, especially if she decides to fight for money. Marcus looked down. She told me she wanted to raise the baby alone, that she didn't want anything from Gavin anymore. That may be true now, but when the baby comes and the bills pile up and she starts spinning new versions of her story, she might remember how easy it is to twist a man's life into a weapon. He sat back, covering his face with his hands. I'm so sorry, Marlene. Don't be sorry. Be useful. He nodded. When do we start? Now. The process took all day. We met with the lawyer, reviewed the language, signed affidavits, attached the DNA test, and filed for a protective declaration that would legally separate Gavin from any paternity claim. It wouldn't stop her from coming back with drama, but it would stop her from coming back with legal teeth. When we were done, Marcus stayed behind, asking the lawyer about custody and visitation rights. That was his road to walk now, not mine. I returned home and found Leonard in the garden, pruning his roses. How'd it go? He asked without turning. She won't be able to touch Gavin now. Marcus did the right thing. And you, he said softly, you've done more than any of us deserved. I stood beside him and looked over the garden beds, remembering all the nights I'd stared into this space with dread. It felt different now. The soil wasn't cursed anymore. Have you talked to Gavin? I asked. Not yet, he said. He needs time. And he did. He barely came out of his room that night. When I brought up a plate of food, I found him sitting on his bed with an old photo album open in his lap. Pictures of him as a child, me holding him with a messy bun and tired eyes, Leonard standing beside us in his carpenter's apron. I used to think we were invincible, that no matter what happened, we'd be okay. But everything feels so fragile now. I sat beside him. That's what happens when the truth comes out. It breaks things, but it also clears the rot. What's left can grow again. He nodded slowly. I want to get help, Mom, for the gambling. I can't pretend it was just stress or bad luck. I was chasing something. Trying to feel in control of something when everything else was spinning. I don't have to explain, I said, placing a hand over his. But I'm proud of you for choosing to face it. Do you think Dad will ever forgive me? He already has, I said. He just doesn't know how to say it yet. And Sienna, do you think she'll come back? I hesitated. Maybe, but she won't come back with the same power. Not this time. Gavin closed the album and set it aside. I feel like I've woken up from a bad dream and I'm standing in the wreckage of my own life. Then let's clean it up together, I said. One piece at a time. The next few days were quiet but healing. Gavin started attending a local support group. Leonard and I spent our evenings in silence, not because we had nothing to say, but because we didn't need to fill the air anymore. And one morning, a letter arrived in the mailbox with no return address. Inside was a photo. Sienna holding a newborn. The baby was wrapped in a yellow blanket, eyes closed, mouth puckered in sleep. No note. No signature. Just the image. I showed it to Gavin later that evening. He stared at it for a long time. He looks like Marcus. You think she sent it as a threat? No, I said. I think it's guilt, or maybe closure. He nodded slowly, then handed the photo back. I don't want to hate her, Mom. I really don't. You don't have to, I said. You just have to let her go. And with that, we both stood in the kitchen, the photo lying between us like a final chapter closed. But in the quiet, I realized something else. My job as a mother wasn't over. It never would be. And as long as my son was still healing, I would be the one to protect him from the shadows, even if they wore the face of someone we once called family.
The seasons began to shift, and with them, something in our household softened. Summer had come and gone in a haze of recovery, and now the early days of fall brought crisp air and leaves tumbling like forgotten promises onto the grass. Leonard took to his morning walks again, and Gavin began volunteering at the community center on Saturdays. He said it helped keep his mind clear, that giving something to others helped him feel grounded again. I believed him, but even as our routines repaired themselves, I could feel a layer of caution beneath it all, the kind of silence that follows a storm. Not quite peace, more like vigilance. We didn't talk much about Sienna anymore. The photo of the baby sat quietly in a drawer, tucked behind a box of old birthday cards. Gavin never asked to see it again. I didn't push. He was healing, and I understood the slow rhythm of wounds closing from the inside out. Still, a part of me watched the mailbox every morning, waiting, not for her, but for the next ripple of damage she might leave behind. And one day, it came. Not from her directly, but from Marcus. I found him on my porch just after lunch, standing awkwardly with a sealed manila envelope clutched in both hands. His eyes were heavy. "Can we talk?" he asked. I nodded and stepped aside. We sat on the porch swing, the creaking of the chain filling the silence between us. He handed me the envelope. I opened it slowly. Inside was a letter, written in Sienna's tight, elegant handwriting, and a birth certificate. I skimmed the letter quickly. It wasn't long, just a few clipped lines. "I've left Nevada. I don't plan to return. The baby is with Marcus now. I've signed over parental rights. I'm not meant for motherhood. Don't try to find me." No emotion, no goodbye, just an exit. "She dropped the baby off 3 nights ago," Marcus said quietly. "Didn't even come inside, just left him in the carrier on my porch and rang the bell." I felt my throat tighten. "And you're keeping him?" "I have to," he said. "He's mine. And he didn't ask for any of this." I nodded. "I'm proud of you." He smiled faintly. "I named him Eli." "That's beautiful." I wanted to ask, do you think Gavin would want to see him someday, when he's ready? I looked at Marcus and saw the same question echoing through his eyes that I had asked myself 100 times. Can something good come from so much pain? "Give him time," I said. "Let him finish healing first. Then maybe." He stood to leave but paused at the steps. "I know I don't deserve it, but thank you for believing I could be better." Being better doesn't mean being perfect. It means choosing differently when you know better. And you are. When he left, I sat for a long time on that porch swing, the breeze tugging softly at my cardigan. A part of me wanted to call Gavin immediately, tell him everything. But another part, the wiser, quieter part, knew that timing was everything, and my son needed to be the one to decide when to open that door. That evening, we had dinner together. Just the 3 of us. No drama, no lies, just a family learning to breathe again. We laughed at something Leonard said about the neighbor's yappy dog, and Gavin looked up at me with eyes that no longer looked haunted. He said, "I'm thinking about going back to school. Maybe study counseling, help people who've gone through what I have." I smiled. "I think you'd be amazing at that." He glanced down at his plate. "Do you think people can really change? Like, really, truly?" I reached across the table and touched his hand. "Not everyone wants to, but the ones who do, they move mountains." Later that night, when the dishes were done and the lights turned low, I sat in the quiet of my bedroom and took out the photo of the baby from the drawer. I held it for a long time, tracing the outline of his tiny face. And for the first time since this all began, I felt something new. Not fear, not anger, but hope. Hope that this child, born from betrayal, might grow up loved and free. Hope that my son, once broken by the lies of others, might become a man stronger because of them. Hope that my marriage, once buckling under the weight of deception, might bloom again in truth.
I folded the photo gently and tucked it back into the drawer. Then I climbed into bed beside Leonard and rested my hand over his. "What's on your mind?" he asked softly. "The future. For all of us." "Think it'll be better than the past?" I looked up at the ceiling and let out a slow breath. "Only if we keep choosing differently every single day." And with that, I closed my eyes, not with fear of what might come, but with peace. Because for the first time in a long time, the truth was finally enough.
The following weeks passed like falling leaves, one after another, quiet and measured. The chaos that had consumed our lives had slowly been replaced with an unfamiliar stillness. Not silence, but steadiness. The kind of calm that felt earned. Gavin began taking classes part-time at the local community college. He said it felt strange to sit in a classroom again at 30, surrounded by students half his age, but he also said it felt right, like he was reclaiming something. He still came home every night for dinner. He still asked for my opinion on everything, from professors to textbooks. But more than that, he started laughing again. Real laughter, not the brittle kind he used to force around Sienna. Leonard and I had found our rhythm again, too. There was no need to tiptoe around each other anymore. He started leaving me little notes in the kitchen, like he used to years ago. I caught him humming once while fixing a leak under the sink, and I stood there just listening, realizing how much I'd missed that sound. For a while, it almost felt like life had reset itself. Until one crisp Sunday afternoon, I walked into the hardware store for a garden rake, and I saw her, Sienna, standing in the aisle near the seasonal decorations, holding a can of paint like she belonged there. My breath caught. She looked different. Her hair was shorter, makeup minimal, wearing jeans and a faded sweater instead of her usual perfection. She didn't see me at first. She was talking to a man I didn't recognize, tall, quiet, plain-looking. And then she turned and locked eyes with me. For a moment, neither of us moved, just two women frozen between past and present. Then she walked toward me slowly, her expression unreadable. "Marlene," she said quietly. I looked at her, heart pounding. "I thought you left Nevada." "I did," she replied. "Phoenix didn't stick. Nothing really did. I've been trying to figure things out. I'm not very good at starting over." "And the baby?" I asked, my voice steady. She looked down. "With Marcus. Still. He sends me photos sometimes. I don't always open them." "You gave up your rights." "I know." She hesitated, then added, "I wasn't ready. I wanted to be, but I wasn't. I thought having a baby would fix everything, make people stay." "People don't stay for babies," I said gently. "They stay for truth, for love, not control." She nodded slowly. "I didn't know how to love without controlling. It's all I ever saw growing up." "That's not an excuse," I said, but my voice had softened. "No," she agreed. "It's not, but it's a start." We stood there, two women who had once shared a family and a secret war, now surrounded by Halloween decorations and sale signs. "Why are you back?" I asked. "I don't know," she admitted. "I thought maybe I needed to see it again, the place where everything broke, to understand what I lost." I studied her carefully. There was no performance this time, no makeup mask, just raw honesty, trembling at the edges. "You can't undo what you did," I said. "You hurt a lot of people." "I know, but I'm not here to beg. I'm just trying to learn how not to be the villain anymore." I didn't reply. I didn't owe her anything, but I also didn't hate her the way I used to. Maybe because I saw in her something familiar now, someone deeply flawed, lost, trying. Or maybe because I had finally stopped letting her control my peace.
She glanced back at the man she had come with. That's Ben. He's good to me. Doesn't know anything about who I used to be. I guess that's part of the appeal. And what do you want from me? I asked. Nothing, she said. Not anymore. She paused, then reached into her bag and pulled out a small, worn envelope. I wrote this a while ago. Wasn't sure if I'd ever give it to you, but I think you deserve it. She handed it to me, then turned and walked away without waiting for a response. I stood there for a long time, envelope in hand, heart pounding. When I finally opened it at home, I found a letter inside, written in shaky but honest words. A letter of apology, not for the sake of forgiveness, but acknowledgement. She admitted to the manipulation, to the lies, to the damage she caused. She explained how scared she was of becoming invisible, how she clung to beauty and control because they were the only tools she ever had. She said she never hated me, but she envied me. Envied the family I had, the love, the roots. She signed it with her full name, no flourishes, no excuses. Just a simple Sienna Marie Holloway. I put the letter back in its envelope and tucked it into the drawer beside the baby photo. I didn't tell Gavin about the encounter. Not yet. Maybe not ever. He deserved to decide how much of her lived in his story going forward. But I knew that moment in the store had changed something in me, because for the first time, I didn't feel like I was holding my breath waiting for her next move. I had outlived her storm. I had stood tall through it. And now I was finally on the other side. The air smelled like apples and distant firewood. Leonard walked into the kitchen just as I closed the drawer and said, "Want to go for a drive? Maybe see the leaves up near the ridge?" I smiled and grabbed my scarf. Yes, I'd like that. And as we stepped out into the cool air, I realized something powerful. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was beginning again on my own terms, with the truth as my anchor. And not even Sienna's shadow could follow me where I was going next. The drive up the ridge was quiet, but not in a lonely way. Leonard's hand rested on the gear shift as he hummed along to a classic tune on the radio, and I watched the trees blur into soft amber and gold as the hills curved around us. The past few months had aged us in ways that no one could see, but I also felt younger in some quiet corner of my soul. Lighter somehow, like letting go of Sienna's chaos had peeled away something heavy I didn't even realize I had been carrying for years. When we parked at the Overlook, Leonard opened the passenger door for me like he used to when we first started dating. We stood side by side on the gravel path, looking out over the valley. It was breathtaking. Patches of red trees bleeding into fields of gold, the mountains rising in the distance like quiet protectors. "Do you think Gavin will be okay?" Leonard asked after a while. I nodded. "He already is. He just doesn't know it yet." Leonard let out a long breath and slid his arm around my shoulders. "We almost lost him." "We almost lost ourselves," I said. "But we didn't." That evening, when we returned home, I found Gavin in the kitchen, stirring something in a pot and humming to himself. The smell of garlic and roasted tomatoes filled the air. "I thought it was my turn to cook," I said, amused. "You looked like you needed a break," he replied with a grin. "Plus, I'm experimenting with being a functional adult now." He was joking, but there was truth beneath it, and pride. We sat down together as a family, bowls of pasta steaming in front of us, and toasted with iced tea. There was no tension, no secrets, just the quiet miracle of a life reclaimed. After dinner, Gavin asked to speak with me alone in the garden. We walked side by side between the rose bushes, the moonlight casting silver across the petals. "I want to see him," he said. "The baby." I looked at him carefully. "Are you sure?" He nodded. He didn't choose any of this, and neither did I, but maybe I can still be something good in his life, even if I'm not his father. My heart clenched at the tenderness in his voice. "You'll need to speak with Marcus." "I already did. He sent me a photo. He said Eli started smiling." I smiled too. "He has your eyes. Even if he's not your blood, that child will always carry a part of you in how he's raised." "I want to help," he said, "even just as a friend, a presence. I think I need that as much as he might." I reached over and took his hand. "Then be that presence. But do it slowly, with boundaries. You've come too far to lose yourself again." He nodded. "I will." A week later, Gavin visited Marcus's home. He came back quieter than usual, but not in a troubled way, just thoughtful. "He's beautiful," he said simply. I held him for almost an hour. He just stared at me like he knew I wasn't ready to leave. I wrapped my arms around my son, and for the first time, I felt like we had stepped out from under the shadow of everything Sienna had done. There were still scars, there always would be, but there was something stronger now, too. Purpose. Forgiveness. That night, Leonard surprised me with a small anniversary gift. Just a card and a single pressed flower from our garden. Inside, he had written one line: "Thank you for saving all of us." I cried, quietly, in the bathroom mirror after reading it. Not because I was sad, but because I had never let myself fully feel how much I had carried, how hard I had fought to keep us from falling apart. And now I could finally feel it, all of it, the grief, the triumph, the release. Days turned into weeks, and our lives found their new rhythm. Gavin began mentoring at the community center for at-risk teens. He told his story not to gain sympathy, but to offer truth, to remind them that survival wasn't the same as healing, and that both were possible. One night, as I watched him speak to a group of teenagers seated in a circle, I realized just how much he had grown. He was no longer the boy caught in Sienna's web. He was a man building something with his pain, bricks made from brokenness, stacked into something solid. Leonard and I sat in the back of the room that night listening. When Gavin finished, the room was quiet. One girl stood up and said, "You make me believe I can fix my life too." He didn't flinch. He just smiled and said, "Then start tomorrow, or tonight. Just start." Afterward, he walked up to us and said, "I'm thinking about applying to grad school next fall, social work." I couldn't stop smiling. "You should. You think I'd be good at it?" "You already are." And I meant it. The next morning, as I poured coffee and watched the sunrise creep over the porch rail, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not fear, not vigilance, but hope. Quiet, steady, unwavering hope. We had made it. Through betrayal, through lies, through heartbreak. We had made it. But I knew one more step remained. One final moment of closure. And I was ready. I just hadn't told anyone yet. I waited until the house was quiet, the coffee finished, and the sun had risen high enough to burn away the chill of morning. Then I got into the car and drove alone. No music, no distractions, just the rhythm of tires on pavement as I headed toward the place I knew I had to visit before any of this could truly rest. I didn't need to call ahead. I knew she wouldn't be there. But I had something to leave behind, something that had lived inside me for far too long. The address Marcus had given me months ago was a modest home on a side street just outside the city limits. He no longer lived there, not since he moved into a better space for raising Eli. But the old house still stood, vacant, quiet, holding echoes of a story that nearly destroyed us. I parked across the street and sat for a long time, gripping the letter in my hand. Sienna's letter, the one she gave me in the hardware store. I hadn't touched it since that day, but I'd kept it. Not because I forgave her, and not because I wanted to hold on to the pain, but because part of me needed to understand why someone could become so lost and so cruel. I got out of the car and approached the front door. The porch creaked under my weight. There was no lock, no one to stop me. I slid the letter under the front door, and with it, I whispered aloud, not for her, but for myself. You don't get to live in my heart anymore. Not as a villain, not as a ghost. You're just a woman who chose wrong, and I've chosen to move on. I stepped back and turned away without looking again. On the drive home, something in my chest felt lighter. My grip on the wheel loosened, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to be on guard anymore. Sienna was behind me. Her choices, her lies, her manipulations, they no longer had power here. When I got home, Gavin was sitting on the porch steps, playing gently with a wind chime Leonard had just hung. He looked up as I pulled in. "Where'd you go?" he asked. "Nowhere important," I said with a smile. "Just closing a chapter." He nodded, like he understood exactly what that meant. That afternoon, we invited Marcus and Eli over for dinner. I had debated it for a while, unsure if it would bring up old wounds, but Gavin was the one who asked. "It's time," he said. "We've all done enough pretending. Let's build something real." Watching him hold Eli that evening, cradling the baby gently while Marcus made corny jokes, I saw a version of my son I had always believed was there, buried beneath the wreckage of everything Sienna had done. He wasn't broken, he was reborn. After dinner, as we sat on the porch with coffee mugs and stars beginning to peek out of the navy sky, Gavin turned to me. "You saved my life," he said quietly. "I thought I was beyond saving, but you never gave up." "Because I knew who you were," I whispered back, "even when you forgot." He nodded, emotion tightening his jaw. "And I want to do the same for someone else now. That's what this pain was for, right? To turn it into something useful? That's all any of us can hope to do." The months rolled forward, and by spring, Gavin had been accepted into his grad program. Leonard expanded his woodworking shop into a small business. I started volunteering at the local library, helping older women learn to use email and FaceTime their grandkids. Our lives didn't become perfect, but they became real, honest. And that was more than I ever thought possible when this all began. Sometimes I still think about Sienna, not with hate, but with understanding. Some people never learn how to be good. Some people spend their whole lives reaching for control when all they needed was connection. I hope, wherever she is, she finds peace. But more than that, I hope she leaves the rest of us in peace, too. One day, I found Gavin sitting under the tree in our yard, Eli crawling across a blanket nearby. I sat beside them and watched as Gavin let the baby grab his fingers and squeal in delight. "He's going to have a better life than we feared," Gavin said, "because we told the truth, because we didn't give up." I nodded, blinking away tears. "And because you kept going, even when it broke your heart." He looked at me, eyes soft. "You taught me how." And there it was, the final page of the story I never wanted to write, but needed to live through. I had been betrayed, yes, lied to, used. But I had also stood my ground. I had protected my son. I had reclaimed my peace. And now, every morning when the sun rises over our little yard and the wind dances through the wind chimes, I remember one simple truth. Sometimes the greatest revenge is not vengeance. It's survival. It's healing. It's watching those who tried to destroy you fade into the past while you build something stronger than they ever imagined. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and join us for the next one. There's always more truth to uncover and more strength to share.